Hello everyone, hope you're doing well, hope you're looking after yourselves. Welcome to another episode of Behind the Curtain, where we go into deeper dives to some of the topics that we bring up in our other podcasts, including the Student Guide. But most importantly, we bring on amazing people doing amazing work and discuss the incredible things that they're doing. We seem to be coming into an influx of podcasters, and we love it because we love to share with you guys new podcasts that you can connect with. And today's podcast is very incredible. But instead, I don't like to do introductions. I like to hear from the guest speakers themselves. So I'm going to pass over to our guest speaker today, Kelly. This is actually our first in-person podcast. So as you guys know, we're going to make her feel more welcome. But Kelly, could we know a bit more about you and what you do?
Yeah, definitely. Hi, everyone. My name's Kelly Shungu, and I'm an engineer, and I'm also a podcaster. I have a podcast called the Women in STEM Podcast, which recently won an award for Best Technology Podcast for 2024, which is really exciting. I'm very passionate about all topics to do with regards to women in STEM, and I'm very passionate about helping people to optimize their career.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Yeah, that's incredible. And congratulations on the award. I guess before we dive into the questions, how does it feel to be an award-winning podcast?
It feels really nice. I feel like, I've been recognized by the community, and this was a global podcast award. So to know that on a global scale I've been recognized, it's really encouraging, and it helps me to feel more empowered to create more content.
Oh, that's incredible. And we will be including links to how you can find out about the Women in STEM podcast and how you can connect with Kelly just before we end. Let's start at the beginning of your journey. So, as someone who's both a digital solutions engineer and the founder of the Women in STEM podcast, I think an important question to ask is, how do you balance your technical career with your advocacy for diversity and inclusion in STEM? And there's a sort of a two-parter to this. So what challenges have you faced in merging these two passions? And if you need anything repeated, just let me know.
Like you said, you're kind of going back to the beginning, and I think we need to start off with where my podcast started and why I started it. So my podcast started during lockdown. I initially was looking for a community of women in STEM to essentially guide me on my career path, because I had just graduated with my master's and I was job hunting during that time. And obviously this was during lockdown, so everyone's in the house. And whilst looking for a community, I actually ended up making one. And so I was connecting with amazing people from around the world. And I wanted to have a format where I could share these conversations that I was having with lots of other people. And so podcasting was what appealed to me at that time. And essentially, with regards to balance, because I had started the podcast whilst I was applying for jobs, it came up naturally during job interviews to mention my podcast. And the place where I ended up working, they were very supportive of me having a podcast, which really helped. I think that was really pivotal in my growth at the beginning stages. And I also went on to, as I got my job and was working full-time, I didn't have the amount of time and energy to dedicate full-time to the podcast like I would have liked to. But I had to learn about the balance. And I see having a podcast a bit like a part-time job or kind of like an entrepreneurship journey. And so I oftentimes will spend my weekends working on my podcast. And I've learned to have some dedicated time for that. And also being satisfied with what it is that I'm able to develop at that time and space. I tend to give myself a lot of grace with season 1 because I was still learning the ropes, learning to edit, learning the tools. And so I think, as the seasons have been going on, I've been growing more into myself, growing more into a podcaster, and developing my skills as an engineer as well.
That's incredible. And I think one key thing that you mentioned there is mentioning sort of your creative passions in interviews, because I know the career department at Brunel, they were saying that that's one of the things that people do forget, is that you've got all this experience that can make you. So when you're applying for jobs, they said sometimes candidates can have similar experiences, maybe similar educational backgrounds, but it's those unique things of you've got a podcast, maybe you've got a YouTube channel, maybe you've, I think my career advisor said that someone in their interview mentioned when they were asked, just tell us a bit about yourself, they said, oh yeah, I was on a game show and I like took part in a quiz on like national television. And it's stuff like that that really makes you stand out from just being like candidate number whatever to, oh, they're the candidate that spoke about their like podcast, or they're the candidate that was on national TV. And it's stuff like that that really makes you stand out when you're applying for jobs. So yeah, thank you very much for that. We're going to go on to the next question, which focuses more about the podcast itself. So you've sort of, well, I guess from the awards, but also anyone who goes to your page and learns more about the podcast will see that you feature a diverse lineup of women in STEM from around the world, which is incredible. So what has been, I think, maybe not some, I'm going to make it difficult. Instead say maybe what's one of the most inspiring stories you've encountered, and how have these stories that you've heard through each episode that you've produced, how have they shaped your own perspective on diversity in the tech industry?
Ooh, you're going to get me in trouble. I've had amazing people on my podcast, and they've all contributed unique perspectives and inspiring stories. And I feel like each guest has taught me something new and has gathered me a new understanding of the STEM industry. If I had to highlight just one guest, since you're putting me on the spot, I would say Dr. Lu. She is a physicist and an inventor with over 35 patents and a career spanning over 6 decades. Yeah, you heard me right, 6. And she appeared on my podcast on season 3, episode 14. And I think I was just so struck by her passion and her commitment to STEM. I think oftentimes people assume that once they get to retirement age that they're just going to slow down on their career path. And she's still creating patents. She's still being innovative and creating new inventions. And I feel like that was just such an inspiration. I feel like she's such a trailblazer. And it really inspires me, the fact that I want to make sure that I'm being very meaningful and intentful with my career, so that when I'm like 6 decades in, I'm still enjoying what I'm doing. I would definitely say, yeah, she's been one of the highlights for me. And I think it also highlighted for me the representation of women in STEM once they get older as well, and once they start maturing. How are we treating them? How are we representing them? Because I think oftentimes we tend to focus so much on getting new people in and the new talent, but what about the existing talent? And so I think that kind of gave me a new perspective on diversity in tech.
No, definitely. I definitely agree. And I know even, my old, someone who's a mentor and he used to manage me, she's now in her 60s, but she's been doing STEM work for like the last 15 years and like encouraging STEM in young people. And she said it's when you sort of like go to these schools, you're teaching them about STEM subject, you can just see that passion. And she said that's like what encourages her to get involved with the activities, because you've got children in receptions up to like children in year 13, like thinking creatively and how they can like tackle, whether it's like a technical issue or like a environmental issue, you give them a problem. And she said just seeing the way that they solve it and put themselves in that mindset within STEM is really, really impactful. So I think, as you said, it's just like the importance of following your passions and, doing things that you enjoy.
Yeah.
We're going to go on to the next question, which, you mentioned in your bio that you're a public speaker. You're also an advocate, as we've mentioned, for diversity and inclusion. So what steps do you believe that the tech industry needs to take to create a more inclusive environment for underrepresented groups, but particularly for women?
But yeah, I've had the privilege of being able to speak at a range of events. I've spoken at big companies such as Google, and I've also spoken at smaller startups as well. And I honestly tend to find my messaging to be quite the same. I think oftentimes people think diversity and women being in tech is like something new. And as of recently, it's become something very fashionable. But I oftentimes like to touch on the history of women in tech. And when we look back at history and we look at the pioneers such as Ada Lovelace, she's the foundation of what we built modern computing off of. So I don't think that women's contribution in STEM should be diminished or erased. I think that we've been here for quite some time, and I think that we need to make sure to remember those women so that we can help inspire a new generation. So yeah, that's something that I tend to often like to cover. And with regards to like on a global scale and even on a national scale, I do think that there are still some systematic biases that tend to exist, especially as a woman in STEM. I myself am in engineering, and oftentimes when I tell people that I'm an engineer, they're like really taken aback because there still is a stigma around women pursuing traditional feminine jobs. And that if you are a woman who then chooses to seek a role in engineering or sciences, that you need to become more masculine or take on a more masculine persona. And I believe that this can be a harmful narrative because it makes people who, such as myself, might want to represent themselves in fashion or want to express themselves in a different way, feel isolated and feel like, okay, that's just not for me. Like the STEM industry is so expansive that there's really something for everybody. And having these very narrow-minded views on what an engineer looks like or what they would be interested in can isolate other people from wanting to pursue a career. So I think those are some of the perspectives that I have. With regards to what I believe that should be done by the tech industry to overcome these issues, I think that we need to start addressing structural barriers with regards to education and career development. So oftentimes the stats will show that even though we have not a lot of women in STEM already, a lot of women will go to university and will study a STEM subject. But then when it gets to going on to a career, a lot of them won't pursue it any further. And that's because of the lack of representation oftentimes and feeling isolated within the workplace. Something else that I would like to acknowledge as well, especially when it comes to women specifically, some of the things that disproportionately affect us is motherhood, is maternity leave, and menopause. And these are things that I believe that the workplace needs to take into consideration and need to have more robust workplace policies put in place so that when women are in the workplace, they feel represented, they feel seen, and they don't feel a fear of losing their job because they need to take maternity leave or because they're going through a phase of menopause. And yeah, I feel like these are a bunch of challenges that we can overcome in due time, and I'm looking forward to helping to empower more women.
No, that's incredible. And I think, based off what you said, more, not even just within like STEM and tech, but if more workplaces took into account the steps that you've mentioned there, it would be a sort of more inclusive work environment in general. So yeah, thank you very much for that. We are going on to the next question. So you mentioned your background, both in engineering, but also you have a background in business management. So how do you see the intersection of technology and business evolving over the next few years? And particularly in terms of fostering diversity and inclusion, how could this look like?
I think that's a great question and definitely a question that really appeals to me because I completed my degree at the University of Leeds in engineering technology and business management. So I've always been very interested in the business side of businesses and as well as the technology aspect of it. And oftentimes people tend to see these as two separate things. There's an infamous saying that says any company in the 21st century that wants to be successful is a tech company because at some point they have to upscale on their tech. And oftentimes there is an invisible barrier between the two departments, the business and the engineering department, because each one of them has very strong points of view as to what is important. And so I wanted to do this degree so that I could have a holistic overview of both departments, to have an understanding of the technical detail, but also understand the relevance of it to the stakeholders and to the end users. Because you can be the world's greatest engineer, but if you're not taking into consideration the end user, then it's not going to have much of an impact. So I felt like by doing this degree, it really helped me bridge the knowledge of the technical side and the business side of innovation. in season 4 of my podcast, the topic of AI came up so much. It's been one of those topics that people just can't seem to get enough of. And I had one guest who was able to share an incredible story. She's a co-founder for a startup where they are creating AI teachers that are able to teach children in third world countries. And they're able to give them personalized learning experiences. And I found this such like a great way of utilizing technology, because oftentimes in third world countries, they don't have access to so many resources, and sometimes having teachers can be scarce, and oftentimes the number of students in the classroom is a lot. So utilizing AI in this way was something very new to me. You know, utilizing AI in technology, I feel like this can really help level the playing fields for people from a disadvantaged background. And I believe with regards to AI and technology and diversity and inclusion, AI can also be utilized as a tool to reduce inequalities and create more opportunities. And I think it's crucial for companies and organizations to invest into diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives now, especially as AI is growing at a very substantial rate. And although I mentioned all the highlights and how great it can be, it can also have the ability to do the inverse. Depending on who is programming the AI, who are the people who are sitting in these important boardroom meetings making these decisions, this can have an impact for multiple generations moving forward. And that's the reason why I think it's super important for making sure that women are in these rooms, minorities are in these rooms, especially as technology is going to be utilized more and more in the healthcare space. And this is already an industry where women can be oftentimes marginalized with our healthcare. And even, as I mentioned, with regards to education, these are such powerful tools. I think that there's so much to be said on this topic, but hopefully I was able to offer the audience some insight.
No, definitely. I think there was a lot that we could learn on sort of where they'll intersect. And I think, like you mentioned, there is the big discussion of AI and how AI will be used in the future. But I think, as you mentioned, having the people, like having a diverse group of people in rooms where sort of like these new technology is being developed is the only way you can ensure that you're catering to your customer, your consumer, and that includes everyone. So yeah, thank you very much. We've come to the last question, which is all about advice. So what advice would you give to young women and underrepresented individuals who are looking to pursue careers in STEM fields? But also, how can they navigate the challenges and seize opportunities in an industry that's still working towards greater inclusivity?
Yes, that is a loaded question. And I myself, at the beginning of my career, understood exactly how somebody who would have this question in mind would be feeling. My advice to young women, specifically and underrepresented individuals, is to be curious and to stay curious. STEM has so many opportunities. Like, we are talking about science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. It really requires you to be open-minded. As I mentioned, the world is evolving rapidly. And so oftentimes the roles haven't yet caught up. And so the role that you might really want might not even exist yet. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't still pursue trying to upskill to get those skill sets. It's something very important. I know for me personally, as a solutions engineer, I never knew what it was before I became one. But as soon as I saw the job description for it, I was like, this is an enmeshment of technology and the business side, which was something that I did my degree on. But I had not, at that time, thought so far ahead. So I would say, don't get so anxious about certain things. Try your best. Try to make sure that you're focusing on topics that you enjoy and focusing on topics that will be very important in the future. For example, AI. But some very practical tips that I would give is to explore resources online. This was actually what I did when I was 15 years old. I literally went on the internet after we started, this was the time when I was doing my GCSEs, and the teachers were saying, like, this is the most important time of your life to pick a career. And so I went on the internet and I was doing some research, and I came across engineering. And I was like, oh, like a mechanic? And then I started seeing all these different careers associated with engineering, like an electronic engineer, which is what I went on to study. And this really opened my eyes to the different pathways and the different opportunities that are available to me. So I would recommend checking out social medias. There's so many social media influencers that pretty much specialize in any field that you're interested in. So I would definitely recommend that. I myself post on my social media quite regularly different career opportunities, different career paths. And I've had so many spectacular speakers on my podcast that have come from a range of different backgrounds. I would also make sure to mention engaging with organization, engaging with your community. Even if you're not already at the place where you're already an engineer or a scientist, this doesn't mean that you can't get out there and start networking. This was something that I started doing, and it's definitely paid off because you get to meet so many interesting people. You get to hear people's stories, and you get to see in real time that actually there are people who are in the career field that you want to be in. And you can talk to them directly and ask them how they got there. And people are actually really kind when you go to networking events. Most people are just there because they want to meet other people as well. So this is a great place. I would recommend like organizations such as Coding Black Female, Women in Engineering Society, Tech Girl Next. These are all great organizations that host regular events that enable you to network and to also get the opportunity to speak with companies directly. And I was able to get my role by attending a STEM women's event. And this really helped me because it made me understand that the company that I was going to work for cared about women in STEM. So that would be also another hack that I would give the listeners, is to go to places where you're wanted and you feel like they actually care about your well-being. And I would say, as I mentioned, like going to these events, checking a company's websites, going to their insights days. There are so many great opportunities out there. And if you still feel like there's not enough, create one for yourself. The internet is limitless at this point. So you can start coding for yourself. You can start working on science projects at home for yourself, upload it to the internet, share it with your LinkedIn. People are always wanting to see new things, hear people's new ideas. And in that way, you might even be able to find people who might want to be able to mentor you. I think this is something very important to your career growth, that it's something that's important to you and that you put your time aside to make sure that you're pursuing this passion. And as I mentioned countless times, STEM is so broad and so many countless opportunities.
Definitely. And I think, like you mentioned there, that it overlaps with so many different industries that I know there's even an organization called Black Girl Gamers that focus on sort of like the world of gaming, but they look at it not just from the consumer level, but also like gaming development. So why is it important to have Black writers writing like the Black experience is more than just sort of what it typically can sometimes be portrayed as, and why is it important to work with Black gaming studios and stuff like that? So they are a lot, like you said, the opportunities within STEM are sort of quite broad and wide. But we've come to the end of today's episode. It's been great speaking to you, Kelly, and learning a bit more about what you do. Before we wrap up, how can people find out about the podcast? How can people find out more about you and connect with you? And if you've got any upcoming podcasts or anything you want to share that people should keep an eye out, please let us know.
Yeah, definitely. So you can find my podcast on all major streaming platforms. So Spotify, Apple Podcast, all the above. My podcast is called Women in STEM Podcast. And I am currently in the process of wrapping up a season, but I will be starting up a new season where I'm going to be having so many great guests. Nice. So you definitely want to check that out. As far as my social medias, you can check me out on Instagram. I'm on TikTok, and I'm also on LinkedIn. So if you want to connect with me personally, my LinkedIn is Kelly Princess Shungu. So that is where you can connect with
Thank you very much. And thank you to our wonderful audience. If you like this episode, like, comment, subscribe is always appreciated. If you want to make sure that you don't miss this episode or any other episodes on the Pick Up the Mic YouTube channel, please make sure you click the notification bell at the bottom of the video. If you want to receive some merch and support the podcast, please check out our Patreon page and our YouTube channel membership. Both the links will be down below. Finally, if you would like to get involved in our other podcasts, our anime, sci-fi, and gaming podcast, head to the Pick Up the Mic main YouTube channel and you'll see just underneath the For You or suggested videos, you'll see all three of them there. But yeah, we're going to close today's episode. It's been great having you here with us. It's great speaking to you, Kelly, and we look forward to speaking to you all soon in the next episode. So take care. Have a nice day.